It's Thursday, April 20th. And while for some today is a holiday of sorts, for us, it's another damn work day. But it does mark the end of our draft positional preview series as we dive into what's supposed to be a pretty loaded tight end draft class. And we're going to sprinkle in some offensive line talk as well. Joining us, as he is every week for this series, it's our go-to draft guy, Charles McDonald. Chuck, this time next week, we will no longer be talking about the draft in hypotheticals, but we're actually going to get to watch it play out. And I know you echo this sentiment. Thank God.
Yeah. Thank God. Thank God. It's been a lot of work, man. It's been a long journey to get to this point between just the scouting, combine, reporting, all juice team, which we'll talk about in a second. It's been a lot of work, but it's been fun because I haven't done this much draft work in a very, very, very long time. So it was kind of fun to kind of get back to my roots and you know, get back into what got me into this business in the first place, which is just kind of sitting around and watching football.
Hell yeah, man. That is the fun part, is you're just watching so much football, which, like, if you don't like to watch football, you're probably in the wrong line of work. I know we both enjoy it. So that is the fun part of the draft process, and trying to get out as much of the, you know, who went to the Manning Passing Academy nonsense as possible the last 7 days here before the draft. We are going to talk about tight ends. We're going to talk about offensive line. Like I said, we're going to sprinkle that in. But first, you mentioned it. The All Juice team came out this week. You and Charles Robinson did a great job on it. People can check it out on the website, yahoosports.com, of course. What was your thoughts going through the process for the first time? Obviously, it's got to feel pretty cool just in general, getting to do something that, you know, is such a big deal, especially with Terez's legacy looming so large.
It was an honor. It was a lot of work. It's an honor. It was a lot of work. I sat there one night and I was just thinking back, I was like, dude, you used to do all this by yourself? That's crazy. Because it's not just, you know, picking your favorite 22 or 23 players from the entire class. That's easy. You know, if you're going to pick 22 guys that are projected to go first round, you can probably fill out a team that way. But the way it's structured, you kind of have to, you have to grab guys from all over the draft. So it's 3 projected first rounders, 2 second rounders, 2 thirds, and then a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and a priority undrafted free agent. So, you know, you're trying to build a team that kind of plays off of each other too. So I remember, you know, when me and Charles Robinson were putting it together, we kind of got to a point near the end where, or not even really near the end, halfway through, we were like, holy crap, our defense is going to suck. Our back seven is trash. We didn't take a linebacker to round 6. I think our safeties were round 5 and round 7. But, you know, you kind of get to shape a team how you want it. And we had a really good offensive line. We have 3 projected first rounders in the offensive line. We have Bryce Young at quarterback. And it was just a lot of fun to put together. A lot of debates with C-Rob when we were putting the team together on a Friday night at midnight Eastern time. But it was a really rewarding experience at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's my takeaway from it, is just how much work Terez must have put into this thing. And yeah, if you're not familiar with it, this is something that Terez used to do every single year by himself. And like you mentioned, it's not just, okay, let's pick 22 players. You got to weed a bunch of guys out. And I do think it's interesting having, I'm sure, different approaches between you and Charles Robinson, going through the whole thing different. That's got to be different, but you're also beholden to the draft, what it gives you. Like you said, the linebacker class is not very good. The safety class, not very good. So those could end up weak positions on the all juice team. But I love some of the skill position guys that you have in here. For the wide receivers, you mentioned it on our show last week. You're going to have A.T. Perry, Zay Flowers, natural choice though for your pick 11 to 20 wide receiver there. And also Tank Dell, I thought was a fun inclusion there at wide receiver as well.
Tank Dell, that was a C-Rob baby, because I like my receivers a little bit bigger than that, but still, you know, that because Charles Robinson, like you said, he looked at it from a way different vantage point than I did, where he wasn't really breaking down film. He was more just calling around and asking about guys and asking evaluators what they thought, whereas I was kind of, you know, doing my own homework with the film and then, you know, asking my buddies, you know, what they thought about, you know, player X or player Y. So it was fun to tackle it from 2 different vantage points like that. And I think that with the team we eventually put together, Yeah, I would watch this team play. You know, Bryce Young to Jay Spears, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, A.T. Perry. We got a good offensive line. Just, don't watch us play defense. But I think, at least on offense, we got a couple.
Yeah, you can put up some points.
We'll put up some points. I think from an offensive perspective, I think we nailed it.
Yeah, I was not surprised when I read the Tank Dell section that the Senior Bowl practices were largely mentioned. There's always like one guy, and I'm not saying that Tank Dell's not going to be a good player, because I do like a little bit of what he brings to the table in maybe like a Taylor Gabriel type of way. But there's always like one dude from the Senior Bowl who's a lighter player and just like exactly in the write-up says like chews up and spits out like the defensive backs in a Senior Bowl practice and becomes, I would say, like a little overhyped as a route runner. But if he's your slot receiver with A.T. Perry as your X, and we talked about him and some of the potential George Pickens light type of comparisons with him. And, Zay Flowers is like your number one receiver at that flanker spot. You're doing something pretty good there from an offensive perspective. So yeah, people should definitely go and check out the team and go and get the new all juice team, the t-shirt and the hoodie, which is linked on the piece as well. I copped myself the hoodie because I just can't have enough hoodies, I guess, like hoodies and t-shirts and hats. There's no hats, but I have like 1,000 of all of those.
I love buying hoodies as it gets to be like 80 degrees outside. I don't know why. I still do it.
Same. I was just outside. It's like the LA weather, by the way, is on fraud watch. But I'm not just saying that because it's my like last month here, but it's been a rough streak of LA weather. Today's like the first 75-degree day. I'm sitting out on my patio in a stupid hoodie because I live in the coldest house on planet Earth in this stupid cave that I can't wait to get out of. But I'm with you, man. Weather's getting nice, but it's nice to throw the hoodie on when you come in the house. That's a good combo.
That sucks. We've had LA weather here in New York for the most part. Like, it's been beautiful for the past 2 weeks, and which is unusual because usually it's like rainy and you don't see the sun from around this time of year. But it's been 70, 80, sunny, and on a cloud in the sky for like 2 weeks. It's been great.
Maybe LA is just easing the pain of separation as I'm about to move. And I'm like, you know what? That's going to be fine.
They're letting you down easy.
Yeah, it's all about me. Yeah. Anyways, let's go into the tight end class here. We've got a big crop of players to talk about. Like I said, a lot of draft evaluators. I'm curious about your opinion of it. Seem to think this is a great class. I've heard even like Daniel Jeremiah say it's potentially the best class we've seen in a decade. Do you agree with that before we kind of dive into a little bit of tight end history here?
I would say, yeah, like just off the top of my head, probably, yeah. But I would also put that with the caveat of it's a pretty low bar, right? Of like what makes a great tight end class. You really only need like 3 or 4 of those guys before you start teetering into that territory, because like just think about across to the league, like how many tight ends are really difference makers? There aren't that many. And to be fair, it's a tough position to play, right? Like especially the NFL level, you have to be able to block, almost as well as like a 6th offensive lineman, while also having like the ins and outs of a receiving game. So that's a lot more information than a lot of guys on the team are taking on outside of maybe like the quarterback. So you kind of got to give these guys time to adjust and things like that. But I will say, like, this is an unusually talented class from, my top 100 is about to drop on Yahoo. And I honestly didn't have any tight ends that I didn't like of the 6 that made the list. And I think that, if you're a team that's looking for someone within the top couple rounds of this draft for a tight end, there's someone for every kind of flavor that you could be looking for.
Yeah, and it sounds like we might get at least 2 and maybe 3 in the first round this year. But like you mentioned, it's a tough position to transition to because of the multi-responsibilities, and just some of these college schemes are very different than what an NFL scheme is going to ask you to do. And I did actually hear an interesting theory. I think it was from Andy Staples on the Prospect to Pros podcast on the Athletic Football Show feed. He basically said as like the power forward position is sort of dying out in basketball, or it's changing, a lot of these guys are shifting in to become tight ends. So well, Charles, I've been complaining about the tight end cancel culture that's going on in fantasy football right now. Like people want to get rid of the tight end position. It's like, just merge it together with wide receivers.
Grow up.
Yeah, grow up. Give me a break. Okay, you can't just quit something just because it's hard. You can't just change the rules to the game because it's hard. I get it. Finding tight ends has not been great in fantasy. All we have to do is just restore the middle class, though. And, we need to get the guy. Yeah, that's my political slogan. We have to bring life to the middle class, Charles. Because obviously we have Travis Kelce at the top, but a lot of the dudes got injured in that like middle class last year. Kyle Pitts disappointed. Darren Waller, like I said, got hurt. George Kittle dealt with injuries. He still scored 11 touchdowns though. Zach Ertz was there, but he got hurt. So if we can get like more guys in the pipeline, if Andy's theory is true, like we're going to get more of these dudes transitioning out of basketball and into football, I think that's actually potential like hope long term for the tight end position. And this might not be an outlier what we're seeing here this year.
Yeah, we'll see how that progresses. That's an interesting comparison to the power forward and basketball stuff. I also think even the style of like offenses we're seeing in college, like a lot of true tight ends aren't really being produced, like a lot of this is like hybrid wide receiver type roles. And unless you're talking about like Iowa or Georgia, some things like that, like where their sets are a little bit more traditional at times, and you're getting like Y snaps where they're on the line and blocking guys. I think that's kind of dying out and also making it a little bit more difficult for NFL guys to evaluate what's possible. But it's just kind of I don't think it's a shifting position as far as the NFL is concerned, really, but it's definitely shifted in terms of like the types of players you get into the NFL. But I think this year you kind of got a wide range of people and body types and tight end archetypes to choose from. So I think most of these guys have a pretty good chance to hit, actually.
Okay, before we get to the specific guys, I do at least want to ask about the recent history of tight ends going in the first round, because I think it's kind of instructive to some of the issues that we're talking about with the position, like the transition and how it can be difficult. So there have been 9 tight ends drafted in the first round since 2010. I didn't want to go back too much farther than that because I think you're kind of getting into like less modern era. We've got the most recent one, Kyle Pitts, went 4th overall in 2021. I think that we should certainly still keep hope that Kyle Pitts is going to be, I don't know about worth the 4th overall pick, Charles, but obviously you're a Falcons fan. You could speak better to this than me. But I think a lot of the disappointment with Kyle Pitts last year has less to do with Kyle Pitts himself. Doesn't even really have much to do with Arthur Smith's offense. I like Arthur Smith's offense. It's just that Marcus Mariota might have been like the worst non-Zach Wilson starting quarterback in the NFL last year. Agree or disagree?
I mean, it was in that territory. I gotta say, the Kyle Pitts, some of the discussions I see just on Twitter blow my mind. Like, yeah, it's absurd to me that people are already down on this guy. How short are our memories?
Right.
But it's not like he's had. It's not like he had a bad start to his NFL career. The first year he
1,000 yards.
He had 1,000 yards. Yeah. So I don't understand. Where the downswing on Kyle Pitts' public opinion has really come from. Because I look at it as he's what, a 22-year-old freak of nature that has already shown he can be one of the most like terrifying receiving weapons in the league. And with the Marcus Mariota thing, it's not even just like he was a bad quarterback for the Falcons. It kind of felt like he had a vendetta out for Kyle Pitts as far as like what those passes were looking like when they were coming his way. There's 2 that really stick out in my mind. It's like the first or second play in their game against Seattle.
Oh my God!
They got Kyle Pitts wide open, like 60 yards down the field, and Mariota just way overthrew him, and he had a clean pocket too. And then there's another play against Carolina where they're playing on Thursday night where Kyle Pitts coming open on a crossing route and Mariota just throws it way over his head. And it's like, if you watch the games, I don't think that Kyle Pitts was even like a different player than he was the year before. The situation just got so much worse. And I do think like where Arthur Smith does have some blame is they got way too run heavy sometimes. Yeah. Like I know that running the ball is their strength and it's going to be their strength and it should be a big part of what they do. But there were some times where they really went overboard and they need to remember, hey, you got Kyle Pitts and Drake London. You don't have to just bury your head in the ground and do this all the time. So look, the Kyle Pitts stuff, he's just, to me, is still as talented as any receiving weapon in the league. And I would expect him to have a huge bounce back campaign this year if he can stay healthy. That's really the only thing I'll be concerned about.
Yeah, I think he's a bit of a victim of his own hype too, as he was like so so hyped up as like a unicorn prospect. There was a lot of people were saying like he could be an X receiver in the NFL. That's how good he was as a mover, stuff like that. And he went 4th overall. That's always going to boost your, like, again, the hopes up and everything. But I agree with you. Like, if you watched the Falcons last year, Arthur Smith actually did a great job of getting Kyle Pitts free down the field, but he just had one of the worst downfield passes in the NFL, which also is kind of tough to square that it took them so long to go to Desmond Ridder. But now they're just like locked into Desmond Ridder. That's a tough thing to square there, but we'll save all the Falcons' misery for another
locked
time.
Into Desmond Ridder while also meeting with all quarterbacks not named Bryce Young.
Yeah, whatever. Okay, so other tight ends though, we still have a lot of hope for Kyle Pitts. TJ Hawkinson went 8th overall in 2019. He's fine. I wouldn't say he's top 10 good. He was traded weirdly fast, but I think is a good player. Hayden Hurst went 25th overall in 2018. He's on his 4th team, and he had, I would say, the best year of his career last year with the Bengals on his 3rd team. David Njoku, 29th overall, 2017. He's breaking out now, but he's on his 2nd contract. It took him a while to get there. Evan Ingram, 23rd overall, 2017. He had his best year on a different team last year with the Jacksonville Jaguars. I would say, he had some pretty good years early with the Giants. It just kind of flamed out there. OJ Howard, 19th overall in 2017, is probably the biggest bust on this list. And I'm still stunned about that. I thought he was going to be a player, and I know he had some injuries, but that one is probably the biggest surprise to me, that he's a straight up bust. The last 3 guys on the list here, Eric Ebron went 10th overall in 2014. That looks really, really bad because of the guys that went after him. Odell Beckham, Aaron Donald went after him in that draft. He had his best year on a different team, though. He, again, same sort of trend here with the Indianapolis Colts. He caught double-digit touchdowns. Tyler Eifert, 21st overall in 2013. He was so good. He was an awesome pick. Great in his prime. And then Jermaine Gresham, last guy here. This feels like it was 1,000 years ago, but he went 21st overall in 2010. He only had one season over 600 yards, and obviously they drafted another tight end in the first round like 3 years later. So I think, though, that's pretty instructive that it's a bit of a hit and miss position, and even when these guys do hit, it can take a long time for it to really work out at the position.
Yeah, the Jermaine Gresham thing just kind of messed with my brain, because I so vividly remember watching that Sam Bradford offense just tear through college football. And I'm like, wow, that was 13 years ago. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. That was a long time ago. And bags and bags of cash later for Sam Bradford. Jermaine Gresham and Justin Keller's not on this list. He went in the first round a few years before this.
He got destroyed by someone. I don't remember who it was.
Yeah. I can't remember either, but he had some injuries as well. But Gresham and Dustin Keller were the 2 guys looking back on this list. I was like, they might have been a little bit before their time too. Like, I think, Gresham was huge, but Keller was like a smaller move tight end type. So I don't know. I think that little history lesson is kind of instructive when you're thinking about first round tight ends, and some of these guys, like when we do mock drafts, and even, on draft night, we'll pair them with like teams that really need a tight end. Like Dallas, I know is really sniffing around like Michael Mayer, who we'll talk about here in a second. But it's like that might take 3-4 years for Michael Mayer to become the dude that we think he could be. It's just a really tough position. I think that's always worth remembering, even when we're talking about top prospects.
Yeah, tough position to play, tough position to evaluate, to coach. But I do think it's interesting that, of those tight ends that we just talked about in the first round, was it 4 or 6 of them have come since 2017? So maybe, I don't know if that's the NFL saying we should try to get more quality versions of these guys, or if it's, just unusually athletic guys that are coming into the league, like in the case of Kyle Pitts or an Evan Ingram. But I do think that that's a little bit interesting. We're seeing teams pick tight ends in the first round a smidge more than they were in the past. 3 of those 6 come in 2017, so that could very much well be an outlier. But even now, we're still talking about Michael Mayer, Dalton Kincaid, Darnell Washington as potential first-round picks. So it's not like the league is fully opposed to them. I think we just kind of need to adjust our expectations for how quickly these guys hit the ground running.
Again, the whole fantasy part of it too, there's a certain segment of people that will argue with you that the tight end production has been so tough the last few years because the league is transitioning them out of offenses. And I don't really think that is true. I think that the draft even shows you they're trying to find tight ends. It takes a little bit of time. And again, the injuries at the position the last couple of years, I think, are the biggest reason it hasn't been important. But yeah, I think it can get its way into becoming a premium position. All right, let's get into the prospects this year. Let's start at the top here. Who is your tight end one between Michael Mayer, 6'4", 249 pounds out of Notre Dame, seems to be more of a two-way player, or Dalton Kincaid, who's 6'4", 246 out of Utah, more of like a straight-up pass catcher? I love Danny Kelly's comp for him in the Ringer Draft Guide, which is another thing everybody should check out. He said, shades of, I don't even want to say it, but I'm thinking it. And he's obviously talking about Travis Kelce there. So a little bit two different guys there at the tight end position. Which player do you prefer?
I mean, I don't even have Dalton Kincaid as my tight end too. So it's going to be Michael Mayer from Notre Dame. I don't know. To me, like there are some of these guys in the draft season that are just, to me, just really easy, clean evals, and Mayer is one of them to me. Just in terms of being a receiver, I know he's not the flashiest athlete out there, but he's as well-rounded as they come in terms of just like getting open, finding spots, making tough catches. I think sometimes the being quarterback's best friend gets overused a little bit, but I do think that that's kind of the archetype that he can slide into pretty quick. He's young, already has a lot of experience. So I think when you look at him, he's a pretty clean prospect. He's not like the best blocker, but he'll go out there and try, and sometimes he can be a positive for his offense. So I think that even that is a spot where he can grow a lot in the NFL. And yeah, I think when you think about some of these younger guys, especially that play tight end, like a Kyle Pitts, Michael Mayer is going to be kind of in a similar situation. What becomes possible for them, like as their body develops, I think is exciting. So that's what that's kind of what puts me in the Mayer tight end one camp. I think it's the age. I think it's the athleticism, which has kind of become underrated for him, and really just how clean of a receiving prospect he is.
Yeah, I watched Michael Mayer, and I feel like just a damn good player. Like you said, easy, safe projection, and I think that's kind of gotten overlooked as well. And there's definitely people that will fall in love with the flashes and like the potential for other tight ends, and we'll talk about some of those like big-time athlete dudes in a second. But yeah, I mean, producer Colin and I were talking about this before we started that, apparently Dallas, and Colin's a big Cowboys fan, Dallas is like really interested in Michael Mayer, and they see him as like a Jason Witten type. And I know Jason Witten sort of kind of became a meme towards the end of his career because he was a disaster in the Monday Night Football booth and then went back to play for the Cowboys. And, he was like so slow and doing the little twinkle toes stuff as a mover but he was an awesome player at his peak. Does that comp sort of make sense for Mayer?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. And it's honestly one that I kept coming back to, but I just hate, comping guys to, borderline Hall of Fame type players. Yeah. And also, I don't know, it just felt a little bit lazy. I'm like, who is a tight end that is really super successful, but also kind of unspectacular at the same time? And I guess Jason Witten is one that comes to mind. It makes a lot of sense. And I think that, as what is good for May already, he already has like a little bit of old man game to him now where he can just kind of box people out and play the muscle game. So that's going to help him as he ages, but he already has it now. So I think that a Jason Witten comparison makes some sense. It's not the biggest guy, the most explosive guy, but at the end of the day, it's just a really reliable football player that you don't have to question like what you're going to get in terms of production each week.
Okay, so what are your reservations about Dalton Kincaid? You have him not even just in the conversation for tight end one, because some people do have him as tight end one. What are your reservations about him that you've got him
I
kind of
see people even have him as like a top 10 player in the class. I don't know. That's a little bit much for me. It's the age and the back, man. I don't know. I think that's a look. I say this as someone that has a bad back. It's tough to kind of overcome that, and getting away from a back injury can be. I say it all the time. One of the former hosts of this podcast would ain't nobody used to have a bad back, That's right. That's, once you got a bad back, you have a bad back. Yeah, and I just kind of worry about like guys who might be a little bit maxed out coming into the NFL. I'm not sure if Kincaid like quite falls into that. And personally, I just like, I know this is a fancy football podcast, but I just like the guys who are, kind of going to be bruisers in the blocking game a little bit, and it's not really Dalton's style. Not that the thing is, like, I don't even think he's a bad player. I think in the other years, this is someone that could qualify for tight end one. Obviously, for other people, he's at that spot. But for me, I just think that Michael Mayer is a little bit safer long term, and I think his game is a little bit more well rounded, which is stuff that I gravitate to, when I'm looking at tight ends.
Well, number one, Charles, fantasy podcast, football podcast is whatever we want it to be. So it can be whatever. It can be whatever the hell we want it to be. So does that mean that Darnell Washington is your tight end too? He's 6'7", 264 pounds out of Georgia. I'm not going to accuse you of being a homer pick either, because I love this dude. I mean, he's huge. He's a freak. And I'm with you that I know that in fantasy, we do typically want guys who are going to be out there running routes. We don't want them to be good blockers. I think, data would probably back that up in terms of putting up fantasy points. But I mean, dude, it matters a ton. And there's so many teams that the Chargers are a great example. And I just spent a lot of time watching the Chargers last year. Obviously, their tight ends, like Gerald Everett's a fine pass catcher, but their tight ends stunk in the run game. And it showed up all the time with like Eckler's production and other stuff like that. So it does matter a lot whether they're good blockers.
Well, yeah. And that's how you get into one of the most frustrating things to me especially during a live game, is when a defensive end, gets like matched up on a tight end in a pass rush, right? And he gets the sack. And everyone's goes, well, why do you have the tight end blocking deep? Well, because sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes
NFC Championship game, right? Like, right. What was it? Yeah. Tyler Kroft was blocking Hassan Reddick, and it's like people freaked out about that. But it happens, especially on play action heavy teams.
And you don't notice when the tight end makes a block, right? And the guy gets stonewalled or whatever, or doesn't get close enough to the quarterback, whatever the outcome of the play is. So if you're going to have to accept the fact that like tight ends in the NFL need to be able to block NFL defensive linemen, it's just what they have to do. What are you going to do? Run 6 offensive linemen on the field every play, and then you're going to have a 340-pound slot sometimes if you flex them out, and it makes no sense. And this is why we go back to, this is why tight end is such a difficult position to play, because you have to have the physical capabilities to stand up against NFL defensive linemen while also having the receiving chops to make a difference down the field. And I think as far as the first one goes, just being a blocker, I don't think that there's anyone better than Darnell Washington, in this draft class. So, dude, there's some tapes where he gets out in the open field and like lines up a cornerback or a safety or even a linebacker sometimes, and they just get annihilated. People be like, oh, the weight difference, so what? Dude, that's a tough block to make, because you have to remember he's, playing between 260 and 270, trying to throttle down and make cuts and get in the way enough where he can actually get his body on someone who's a lot smaller and faster and quicker than him. And he makes it look so easy. You go back to the combine, where even at that size, I think he had like the third fastest 20-yard shuttle of combine participants, which is insane. When you think about how big he is, the fact that he's able to get low and sink like that, I think there's work to be done as a receiver, but there's so much physical talent there that it's kind of hard for me to see like where he doesn't end up at least as a useful player, because he's a freak athlete and the blocking is already top tier.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of him. And I think, like, we talked about Tyler Eifert earlier. Tyler Eifert, number one, is smaller than Darnell Washington. Like, the receiving stuff Tyler Eifert was so good because, like, you could just send him up the seams, and he was just bigger than everybody. He was bigger than everybody that was going to cover him. And I feel like Darnell Washington, even if, again, some of the receiving stuff needs some work, he's a big time athlete. I mean, the 10-2 broad jump is pretty insane at that size. And he's explosive. You send him up the seams, and he's going to be like, you just throw it to him because he's bigger than everybody. And like, he's going to be a vertical weapon simply just because of that size. Do you think he ends up being a first round pick?
It's definitely possible. I think that I know that the NFL might look at this differently, but I really don't see why he would have that much worse of a chance than Kincaid, because he's another guy that's I think a younger senior too. And dude, like we just talked about the physical attributes. I think that someone's going to fall in love with that. I don't know if it's day one, but his case to go in the first round is not any less convincing than Dalton Kincaid, in my opinion. And I think that, he's just kind of such a unique weapon that it doesn't even need to be a team that needs like immediate receiving help. If we just want to punch it in on the goal line a little bit more or get some pop to our outside zone game, that's someone that you can look at there. And then as the receiving stuff progresses, I think he'll just become better in that area. Because like there's some plays where he doesn't run routes great. I think his like yards per route run against man coverage was just abysmal last year. But dude, he's 6'7", 265. Like there's times where Georgia, they just go run to the back of the end zone and stand there and we'll try and throw it to you. And he comes down with it sometimes. So there are ways to get his unique physical traits like to your team's advantage pretty early on.
I'm doing like a dream prospect matchmaking article for the site that should have been up already, but haven't sent it in just yet. Whoops. Yeah. We'll do that after this podcast. But also, like I mentioned the Chargers earlier, that would be like a great fit for him. A 21st overall might be kind of aggressive, but again, they need him in the run game. They need him as a vertical weapon down the field, down the seams. Red zone stuff, that would be great. Their red zone receivers are a little problematic, even though they have a great size guy in Mike Williams. There's a reason Eckler scored like 30-something touchdowns the last 2 years. But I'm a little afraid that 35th overall, the Colts, I mean, my God, how another huge athletic tight end to go to waste in Indianapolis. Why not? What just that's kind of Chris Ballard's thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's not the only thing going to waste in Indianapolis. There's a lot of things going to waste in Indianapolis, especially last year. I just think the top of this tight end class is just, it's good stuff, man. And the fact that like we're even talking about Darnell Washington, I think he's another guy that could be a tight end one in another year, but there's just a bunch of these guys that are grouped together this year. And I really just like how unique and different all of these guys are. And I think it's going to make for some interesting, style fits on draft day. Because I think where this class is unique, as I kind of wrapped up my watching of it this morning of the entire class, I don't know if there's like a whole end of top end talent. Like, a Michael Mayer, as much as I like him, he doesn't get me going like, Kyle Pitts did coming out of Florida, where it's just like, oh my God, like I have Megatron playing tight end. But there is a whole lot of like quality talent where you can be like, okay, we need this type of player. We can go get player X, and then team Y can be like, we need this kind of player. We can go get player Y. And I think that they can even be graded similarly, but depending on what you need, there's kind of like a player for you, especially like in the first 3 rounds. I think that this tight end class reflects that as well.
So let's talk Sam LaPorta. He's out of Iowa. I mean, you mentioned Iowa earlier, just cranking out tight ends all the time. This guy's 6'3", 245, ran a 4.59 at the combine. Pretty good athletic testing for him. What can you tell us about Sam LaPorta?
I mean, he falls in the same category as underused, really quality tight end at Iowa, like George Kittle. Like I remember when you go back and look at George Kittle's his stats in college, I think it wasn't anything crazy. Like he had like less than 400 yards receiving, I think, his final year. But the caveat on that was Iowa threw the ball so little that when you actually like divvied up how much of like, receptions and yards that he had of Iowa's passing yards, it ended up being a pretty good chunk, and you got to see his talent that way. So if you had the misfortune of watching Iowa football this year, dude, like there were games where you had to like where they had to pray for their defense to score a touchdown so that they can just try and get on the board. And, I think his situation is similar to a degree in Zay Flowers from Boston College, where he was dealing with Phil Jerkovich, who wasn't all that accurate, and then they had a little rotating door beyond Jerkovich. But dude, what Iowa has going on, I think it's even more bleak than the Boston College situation. All you have to do is just go look at some of their game logs for their quarterback, and you'll see, there's like 3 yard per attempt games in there where they're not getting anything off the ground. And I don't think that is indicative of the talent LaPorta is. I do think that, he's kind of one of these guys where the situation at times was so bad that you have to get a little bit imaginative with what's going to be next. But I think, he checks a lot of boxes off, and hopefully he can just be one of those guys where I just didn't get a whole lot of chances to produce in college, and I can do a lot more in the NFL. Not to say that his production in college is bad, but you just got to look at the Iowa offense, man. Just watch one game and you'll see what I'm talking about.
I mean, shoot, Sam LaPorta had 657 yards, 58 catches. Both were team highs. Nobody else had more than 400 yards on this team, on this Iowa team last year. George Kittle, by the way, 314 yards as a senior was his career high.
Yeah.
22 catches.
But yeah. That last year at Iowa, I remember this because I looked it up. They passed for less than 2,000 yards for the whole season. So, you look at 300 of like 1,800. That's not that bad.
Oh, my God. Yeah. CJ Beathard. Shout out CJ Beathard.
Wow.
1,928 yards, 17 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. This fella, the Iowa quarterback, by the way, Andy Behrens has thrown his phone out of his window listening to all this Iowa slander. Spencer Petras, the quarterback.
Yeah.
5 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. That for the whole season, 5 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. That's disgusting.
How many passes did he throw?
281.
Dude, that's not even like a small amount, Like,
yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of pass attempts for 5 touchdowns. I mean, and the other dudes, two other quarterbacks threw passes this year, 2 touchdowns between them, and 2 picks between them. So the entire year they threw 7 touchdowns to 7 interceptions.
This is not Sam's fault, man. You got to watch it with the caveat of knowing that they weren't scoring, man. That's not what Iowa does, okay? They don't score touchdowns on offense. You got to go on defense and special teams for that.
By the way, Charles, this is why when we slam on Tennessee as a Looney Tunes offense, and Tennessee fans get pissed at us for saying this, they're like, "You're calling us a Looney Tunes offense, and these bros out in Iowa are throwing 7 touchdowns to 7 interceptions." Like, shut the hell up. And I get it. I get it.
Dude, I'd rather watch Tennessee offense than this any day. This isn't good for, at least the Tennessee offense is good for entertainment value. This isn't good for entertainment value or valuation. This is just, it's slop. But I think Sam's a guy that has a chance to be, it's a cliche, but better pro than NFL player because of what we just talked about.
Shoot, man, it can't get much worse than that. All right, Luke Musgrave. 6'6", 253 pounds out of Oregon State. Musgrave is actually, I think, Lance Zierlein, NFL.com's top-ranked tight end. What do we need to know about him?
I'm not all the way with Lance there, but I love Musgraves. And I understand that it's kind of an irrational opinion to have because he only had 11 catches last year before he got hurt. It wasn't a big sample size. I also think he only played in 2 games before it all kind of fell apart for him. But dude, you just got to watch him move, man. He's one of those guys where you watch him get the ball in space, you watch him pluck it out the air, and he's just kind of moving different from everybody else. And I think what I really like about him so much as an athlete is it's the coordination at 6'6". A lot of those guys are clumsy or they're not fast, but he's one of those rare guys, when he catches it, he looks like a fluid athlete. He doesn't look out of place with the ball in his hands or trying to make plays down the field. So I think, he's another guy that's a part of this receiver or tight end class that's really quality. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up as the best receiver of these guys. And look, I know it's a small sample size, but there's something about the traits and the way that he goes out and gets the ball. And like I said, he's got some yards after the catch threat, which I think is a little unusual for his size. I like his game a lot.
11 catches in 2 games, just like you said, 169 yards. The year before that, he had 22 catches for 304 yards and 1 touchdown. So yeah, it's a small sample, like you said, but as you're talking about the yards after catch stuff, the NFL.com comparison that Lance gives out is Dallas Goedert. And what I think stands out with Goedert is he is definitely a guy that works down the field. He has that size, but Dallas Goedert has to be one of the best all time in terms of tight end screens and that yards after catch ability. So that makes a lot of sense when you're talking about all those strengths that Musgrave has.
Yeah. And I think an offense like the one that Philadelphia runs would be a good fit for him because, if I'm a team that has him, I'm trying to get him matched up on, linebackers, safeties, because he's going to be bigger and faster than most of them. And I think that's where Dallas Goedert can win too. Dallas is even the guy where they can use him if they can get him a little bit creative and get him a step. Like, he's a deep threat for them too at times. So Musgrave, he's just a really versatile receiving weapon. I think, the blocking probably has to come a ways, but still, like, when you're talking about guys who are that big that move like that, they're kind of hard to find. And even with his small production, I still like his game a lot.
Other two guys I have on my list here to talk about, and if there's anyone else I've missed, like, please feel free to let me know. I'm not as in tune as the tight end class nearly as I am with the receivers. Tuker Kraft out of South Dakota State, 6'5", 254, and then also Luke Schoonmaker. What a name. 101 in terms of the name. He's out of Michigan, 6'5", 251-pound senior. Either of those guys stand out, or somebody else we haven't mentioned yet?
I like Tuker Kraft. I think, of the like tight ends, I think that I really be interested in drafting. He's probably like the last of the six. So it's like Mayer, Kincaid, Washington, LaPorta, Musgraves, Kraft, and then from then on, I think you're kind of just hoping for guys to develop. But dude, Tuker Kraft, he is so funny to watch. I was talking to our friend Derek Klassen literally this morning about him because he was one of the last guys that I had to watch this morning, like, as I finished up my big board and got ready for this show. He's someone that you wouldn't. It's so bizarre watching him run because he runs, like, motion-wise, like the slowest person on the planet. And then you just see, like, he's running away from guys and, he's making a couple angles of race, like on linebackers and maybe some of the slower safeties. So I looked it up. I was like, wait. Is this just like a trick on my eyes? And I looked it up. He actually ran a 4.69 at the combine at about like 265 pounds. So look, that's moving. And, I don't know if he's going to be this dynamic threat in the NFL, beyond the combine. Like, you just have to watch the way that guys move a little bit. And I don't think he, quite moves like a top tier dominant receiving weapon, but I don't really think that there's any holes in this game. I think he's a guy that's going to end up being real solid all the way around, plays for a long time. And then, you look back and like, wow, Tuker Kraft, he had a nice career for quite a bit of time. And I think that, we're talking about 6 tight ends that can come in and be a difference for your team. That's really, really unusual for draft classes. And I think that even starting to get these guys, the Division I AA, like Tuker Kraft, it's pretty impressive. And also just another sign that we are really developing some mutants into the sport. Like, we got the 6'6", 260-pound guys who run a 4.6 at South Dakota State now. Like, it's getting dangerous.
Okay, speaking of mutants, I do have to ask about this guy, last tight end here, because Taylor Heineke, my dude, current backup quarterback for your Atlanta Falcons, ODU's finest. Maybe we might have a new ODU's finest with Zach Kuntz. Like, you want to talk about mutant? This guy is a total freak show. 6'7", 255, ran a 4.55, 10.8 broad jump, and a 40-inch vertical at 6.87 second three cone. I mean, this guy is a freak. Have you seen him at all? And can he be the next ODU's finest on this very podcast?
I have not seen him, but I will say the former defensive lineman to me is saying, go get your hand in the dirt and go make $100 million versus a passer with numbers like that. Dude, you're running a 4.5 and got a 6.8 three cone. You better put on a 95 and get rid of that 85. What are we doing here?
I mean, listen, you're not wrong in terms of career ability. That's like we just talked about the tight end contracts, like the gap there between even like difference makers and difference makers at other position, much less like the dudes are getting paid at defensive line right now. Yeah, come on, man. Like, Charles, what if you ran a 4.55 or whatever, and you were 6'7"? You sure as hell would not be talking to me on this podcast.
I was just about to say, you stole the words right out of my mouth. I would not be sitting here talking to you if that were the case.
Well, you know what? In that case, I'm glad your current height and weight, and you don't. I mean, maybe you run a 4.5, but I definitely with your back, probably not. So I'm glad. Dude, I'm glad you're here. Although, I mean, it would be nice if you were, a multimillionaire. That would also be pretty sick.
Yeah, I topped out at a 4.8, so I don't think I'm hitting a 4.5 anytime soon.
Well, hey, just keep working on your top 100 and all this work Yahoo's doing, and I'm sure they'll pay you $multi-million anytime now.
Oh yeah, they definitely will.
just keep working at it. Okay. like I said, I want to sneak in some offensive line talk here. I know it's not a fantasy position, but it's important, okay? I had the same thought that you kind of said earlier about the tight end class, about this offensive line class, that I think it's a little bit indicative of the entire draft. Like, there's no true blue chip stud, in my opinion, at the top of the draft. Some of these guys, they have been taken very high, haven't necessarily worked out. Like, I always come back to, Eric Fisher was fine, but like Luke Jokel, what a disaster when he was the second overall pick. But we don't have guys that are probably going to go in the top 5. But there's a lot of intriguing players who could be, top 30 to 40 prospects. The one guy who's typically mocked in the top 10 because, he's Peter Skoronski, Northwestern, 6'4", 213. Going to the Chicago Bears. That's a popular pairing in mock drafts. But Skoronski seems like a guy who could be, a right tackle. He seems like he could be a guy that gets kicked into guard. Is he the top offensive line prospect to you in this class? And how do you think he fits in the NFL?
Dude, I love the top of this offensive line class. I've been a little bit confused by some of the talk around it because me and my buddy Nate Tice, we've talked about this a lot. We think this offensive line class is pretty good. I actually ended up having 3 of my top 5 players ended up being offensive linemen in this class. Yeah. So I have Skoronski, Paris Johnson, and Darnell Wright. Skoronski is like plug and play. Where do you need an offensive line spot? He can play. And I think when you're looking at a school like Northwestern, to me, I think you want to see, if it's going to be a first-round prospect, you really want to see some pop. And Skoronski, he just looks different from all of the guys that are, playing with him, playing against him. I even think he's a guy that could play left tackle in the NFL. I know that there's the arm length thing, but I tend to not be so scared of, the hard cutoff on the arm length and just more rely on the game tape. But I think that when you watch him play, man, I don't really see why he couldn't play left tackle in the NFL. But if you're just a team that needs offensive line help, like he can play guard, he can play right guard, right tackle, left tackle. So you're talking about a guy that can plug in 4 spots on the offensive line and play at a high level. Like if you're a team like the Bears that needs just offensive line play,
right.
He's the guy to go after because he can make your offensive line right no matter where you need to put him. Whether it's a left guard or left tackle or right tackle for the Bears. I really like Skoronski's game. I think it's clean, but I think he's also got like a high upside to get better because he's also someone that can stand to get a little bit stronger too.
It's similar to the wide receiver stuff that I know there's like, look at the guys who have had success with 31-inch arms or whatever, 32-inch arms or whatever. And same thing with receivers. Like, look at the guys who've been high-end producers at 5'9". There's just not very many of them. It's like, okay, well, there's not a lot of like straight stone cold ballers that are 5'9", right? Like typically they'd get weeded out of the position at this point. Same thing with the arm length stuff. And it's like, you watch these guys play and like, tell me that like why an inch is going to make a difference. I know it's a game of inches, but I like an inch or a couple inches. Like, is it really going to change that much about a player's game? So I do understand like your point about the arm length there. And yeah, we just talked about the Bears with Andy on the last podcast, and yeah, they could use just offensive line. Tennessee at number 11, they could use an offensive lineman. They signed Andre Dillard, but like Andre Dillard's not a proven player, and basically they could use help at almost every other position on the offensive line.
Yeah. And I kind of think these tackles are going to fly off the board.
Yeah.
And Skoronski, he's one of those guys that can kind of play everywhere. But when you look at, to me, Paris Johnson and Darnell Wright, like those 2 guys, it's like we are going to a science lab to create the perfect offensive tackle prospect, physically at least. And I think what makes these guys so exciting is they already have really high floors. And especially in like Paris Johnson's case, there's a lot of room where these guys can get better as far as, footwork, balance. But I can't teach someone to be 6'6", 320 and have the feet of a wide receiver, And that's where they get a little bit different. I think that, the flaws in especially those 2 guys' game is coachable, but the physical traits is just not. And I think that's what's going to end up pushing them up. That's what pushed them up the board for me. We'll see how high Darnell Wright goes because he's been mocked more like back half of the first round. But Paris Johnson, I think, is going to hear his name called real early on the draft next week because, dude, he looks like he looks like he could play tight end at 315 pounds. It's crazy.
Yeah, he's obviously, like you said, a really clean prospect. But I mean, even the Jets, like if they stick at 13, that's a great pick for them. Paris Johnson, like get Aaron Rodgers some protection. But yeah, you brought up Darnell Wright, dude. And obviously, I've seen a ton of him because I've been watching Tennessee's Looney Tunes offense, and therefore you see him on an island all the time as a pass blocker because, like we talked about, the space that Tennessee's offense creates, you're not going to have, like, you'd see him one-on-one with dudes all the time. And I'm watching to try to get a sense of Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt and all that stuff, even Hendon Hooker for our quarterback episode. And I'm like, 58 is a guy. I mean, like Darnell Wright is awesome. I found myself getting higher and higher and higher on Darnell Wright throughout the process. You also got to love that, like, he's basically been in the DMs of any draft analyst who criticizes him on Twitter. So you got. I
respect that so much. I respect that so much. We are not worthy of respect, and I don't even mean that to slander. It's funny. It's all part of the content cycle. But Darnell, hold off until Thursday. Just get through Thursday. I think log off his Twitter for a little bit. And then after you get drafted, that's when you really go back and say, well, now I'm a first round pick. What about it now? So Darnell Wright, slide in the DMs, being nasty. I like it a lot. It's fun stuff.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good mentality. And also it's a reminder to you internet goofballs out there, like, the prospects coming into the draft now grew up on the internet. They're on social media. They will find you if you say something about them, and you screenshotting it and tweeting it out for credibility is not cool also. Okay, that if you get your engagement however you want it, I get it. You got to get that Twitter dopamine. You got to give yourself some purpose for being on this planet, but that doesn't make you look good either. Okay, so yeah, Darnell Wright, keep doing what you're doing, pal. And I do think he's going to be a really good player.
Dude, I don't know if I do know this is a hot take, but I have him as the best offensive lineman in the draft. He's my third ranked player in the entire draft. Darnell Wright.
Wow,
dude, I don't really see a lot of flaws in this game, and he played left tackle too for a season as well. So it's clean feet. It's ridiculous, like top 1% athleticism at 6'6", 335. You talk about a guy that can play both sides and is a top athlete in the league. Doesn't really have a lot of holes in his technique. I don't know. Like when I come to offensive linemen, I'm just checking off boxes that I think are clear, and he hits all of them. So I think it's going to be a long-term starter, and he's not going to be a guy that surprised me if he ends up playing well for a really, really, really long time.
Hey, Darnell Wright, that's at 4verts. If you'd like, if you'd like to slide in the DMs and tell him he knows ball, you could do that too. If we want to do both sides, the positive and the negative. But yeah, man, I'm with you, Darnell Wright. Nobody message me, please. Everybody stay out of my DMs. But yeah, Darnell Wright, I think he's going to be really good too. That's awesome. You have him as a top 5 prospect because he just stands out every single time you turn on the Looney Tunes Tennessee offense. You love to see it. Okay. Other guys here. Osiris Torrance, offensive guard, big guy, 6'5", 330 out of Florida. Broderick Jones from your Georgia Bulldogs, 6'5", 311. And John Michael Schmitz, the top center of the class, seemingly. Pretty big guy out of Minnesota, at least.
Yeah, I like all these guys too. I think the top of this O-line class is really good, or maybe I'm just, in my older age, I'm just a positive draft guy where it's like, you know what, I love all these guys trying their best, and it's so much fun. We're going to have a blast when we get to the NFL. No, but I really do think there's a good amount of quality first round options in this year's draft. Broderick Jones from Georgia, he is just like all upside. I don't think he's like a finished product just yet. I think he could stand to get a little bit stronger. But again, you're talking about like a guy who's 6'5", 310 that just moves like that. It's crazy. There's a lot of guys like that where the movement skills are a little bit unusual for a player of their size. John Michael Schmitz for Minnesota is another one. Like when you're thinking about just classic, to me at least, classic like zone blocking centers, that can get out and flip their hips and get in front of guys and make blocks at the second level with ease and kind of make it look like, they should be playing another position. Those are the guys I really gravitate to. I don't want to call him Jason Kelce, but like Jason Kelce is the archetype for that player when I think about it. Like we've seen Kelce out there where they'll pull him on screens and swings and stuff like that. And he's getting out to the second level on the edge, blocking the linebacker. I think that, Schmitz has some athleticism that's like comparable to that. And then there's two other guys like Osiris Torrance. I think he's a clean guard prospect. Maybe you worry about like how quick his feet are at times, but I don't think there's anyone that just moves people as easily as he does. Just, pick someone up, move him out the way, and he's doing that to like 320, 330-pound guys. And then the last guy I think that's kind of interesting off the top of my head is DeJuan Jones from Ohio State. 6'8", 374 pounds at the combine, which is a little bit alarming. Obviously, like when you're talking about someone like, well, your in shape weight is close to 4 bills, it's a little alarming. But dude, he moves so well for someone that size. Like, I think he might struggle a little bit with how quick NFL guys are, but for the college game, it was pretty unusual to see, a 380-poundish guy be out there and be able to like match speed rushes and stuff like that. So I'm really interested to see what happens with him in the NFL because he's kind of like a test case on like, well, how athletic do you have to be before your weight like doesn't really matter anymore? Because even at 374 pounds, he still ran about 5 seconds on the dot in the 40-yard dash, which is unbelievable for someone of that weight. Like absolutely unbelievable.
NFL.com again, Lance Zierlein has his player comparison as Trent Brown for DeJuan Jones, and Trent Brown 6'8", 380 pounds, but that dude, like when he's in his prime, he could move, and I feel like that's a very similar kind of comparison here with DeJuan Jones.
That's so big. 6'8",
that's so big. I mean, my God.
Like, holy
Listen,
there's no way my kids are playing football, man.
that is ginormous.
Nah, that's a lie. Let's not go too far.
Yeah, come on. Relax. How else are you going to live vicariously and have a kind of rewind of your own glory years, if not through your children?
That's right. Well, I'll just be sad, I guess, like other parents.
Oh, well, that's a depressing note. Hell of a show. All juice team, tight ends, offensive linemen. We talked about some real football players, some meathead, hand in the dirt type stuff. I know you need some of that in your life, Charles. So I thank you for joining me for this one. And it's been a hell of a ride with all of our prospect previews. Yeah,
it's been a hell of a ride. I'm glad we got to talk some real football players. And as much as I like you, I'm glad it's over because I need to get to May. I need to get to May first.
Bro, you think you need to get to May? As I said to Dalton on the last podcast, my brain is currently at any moment juggling prepping for the draft, doing reception perception, this podcast, moving across the country, and now buying a house. Now we're going to close on a house here pretty soon. So if you think your brain is fried, just imagine the stress bubble that is constantly kind of revolving around my brain at any times. But, no one cares out there about that. I know you probably don't even care. But what really matters here is, my God, the draft is only a week away. We are going to be back. You are going to be back on Thursday night to recap all the action from night one of the draft. So it's not over yet, Charles, but everybody out there, be sure to check that out, likely when you're waking up the next day and want to know the true winners and losers of round one. Before then, though, next Tuesday, we're going to have an awesome guest. Tommy Moe from the Undroppables is going to join us for what I'm calling sort of a prospect wish casting. Like, let's try to get these dudes to a spot that they'll really thrive. Maybe the fantasy football dream mock draft show or something. I don't know. We'll come up with a good name for it. Again, just trying to find guys a good home. So, Charles, appreciate you, man. Appreciate everybody out there listening, watching. The draft is soon, man. Until then, we're out.